Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, before we begin this podcast, I have a trio of announcements to make. And the first is after 1,250 interviews, don't worry, I'm not stopping doing the podcast. I'm going to be introducing sponsorship on future shows. I think I'm going to start in July. And it has been a crazy few months, and freelancers such as myself are usually the first people that are let go. And I'm not sure why, but I don't want to be the podcaster guy asking for you all to please donate to my Patreon account. It just feels a little bit too close to digital begging for my liking, because I want to serve you, my audience, not ask you for money. But working alongside businesses to help support this daily tech podcast via a few sponsored ads seems like the best win for everyone. So that'll begin in July. But on top of that, I'm also going to be hosting 2 new podcasts, which you'll be able to find on Spotify, iTunes, all the usual places. And like I said, have no fear, Tech Talks Daily is going nowhere. This is a real labour of love for me. But I will be hosting a new podcast with Citrix, and also going to be launching another podcast with Netgear. So that's going to be 3 podcasts that you're going to find on the internet there. So apologies in advance if it does end up feeling like I'm everywhere on the tech podcast circuit. But I just wanted to take this moment to thank you all for your support along the way, and hope that we can continue building this thing we started together into the future. But as I always say, this podcast or any of the other podcasts that I do is never about me. It's about the guests, and it's about you listening at home and the kind of value that we can share between us. So on that note, I recently came across a company called Supportful, and it's as far as I'm aware, it's the only online crowdfunding for support platform that's relevant to this current climate of hardship. And not only right now, but in the weeks and months to come, because unlike some of the other familiar online crowdfunding tools, such as GoFundMe, Supportful is allowing people to raise funds for a cause or person, but also taking it a step further as this seamless portal that allows people a singular virtual place to crowdfund support in other ways, such as transportation, meals, and babysitting. And given the fact that people everywhere, wherever you're listening in the world to this podcast, are likely to be experiencing a range of hardships, from financial and job losses to hospitalization and isolation and the challenges that come with that. I wanted to find out more about how Supportful is using technology to unite the global community and also encourage us all to help one another. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way back stateside, where we're going to speak with Nicholas, who is the founder and CEO of Supportful. So let's get him on the podcast now. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Nicholas. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thank you. I'm really excited to be with you here today. My name is Nicholas Emerson Mazzoni, and I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Supportful. As our name tells you, what we're doing is really revolutionizing the way people are experiencing caregiver and crisis management in today's day and age. It's a creation that largely came out of my own frustration and personal experience with my father, which I can touch upon later. But what our business does effectively is, if you're going through any sort of hardship or need, anywhere from medical, crisis relief, death of a loved one, or named to pets or sports teams, missions, charity efforts, or community efforts, whatever it may be, we've created a full experience around the convenience of aspect. We acknowledge that this is a time in your life where all resources, time, physical, mental, and energy, money, and the like, it's at a premium, and every minute matters. So we're here to help make every minute of that more meaningful.
Now, as you said, Supportful is the only all-in-one online crowdfunding for support platform. And I'm aware that it feels incredibly relevant to this current climate of hardship. And it's been an incredibly difficult year, especially for everyone listening in 165 different countries. It's something we all share at the moment. But can you set the scene and tell the listeners how you're using technology to help the global community and help them support each other?
Sure. So, especially given the pandemic right now, we created a COVID dedicated page. You can go to supportful.com/COVID. And on there, we have resources on ways you can get involved, whether it's help for yourself, a loved one, or community. We created examples of how you can create those most vulnerable, how to support local businesses, creating care packages, as well as directly supporting individuals impacted. So we realize it's hard to know where to get started. There's so many things going on. It can feel very overwhelming. So we created resources to help make that seemingly insurmountable and intimidating aspect actually approachable. I know it's easy to become an ostrich and kind of want to put your head in the sand, and people cope differently, and we get that. We try to thoughtfully and productively let people know that when they're ready to take their heads out of the sand and take a few steps forward, that we're here standing next to you to help guide them forward.
When you think of crowdfunding, a lot of people listening will immediately think of GoFundMe. So just to get everyone on the same page, how is Supportful different from those other crowdfunding tools like GoFundMe?
Sure. So, first off, GoFundMe, one thing I learned when my dad was in the hospital, and I used GoFundMe, so this was, back in 2006, I had only heard the name. I wasn't very familiar with a lot of other resources out there, and, on 2 hours of sleep and, just trying to keep my head above water, I created a GoFundMe page. And one thing I didn't realize at the time is any money you raise, the fees are taken out from you, the page organizer, which at the time, you don't want to seem ungrateful because it's already, people have contributed and you've raised money. But then you're really, you raise $1,000, you're actually only getting like 900 something of that. And so that, struck me as kind of crazy that if you have a surgery, for example, that costs $1,000, you need to raise $1,000. You don't know that you need to raise $1,050 or whatever the case may be. So we don't charge a fee for support page creators at all. We believe asking for help shouldn't cost a thing. There are enough barriers to entry, enough difficulty with just getting your keys on the keyboard and creating a page and asking people and opening up. And so what we've done, and we did, we polled people beforehand and did surveys, is we asked the donor themselves to pay the fees. So that way, if you want to support your friend, you pay the credit card processing fees yourself. So that way, if you're giving $100 to your friend who's going through a hardship, you will pay the credit card processing fees on top of that. And the person themselves actually gets that $100. So on somebody's thermometer, the money they've raised is actually the money they're getting. So that's one of the major things that GoFundMe and kind of similar, smaller businesses, or I guess now companies GoFundMe's acquired, do the same thing. And then secondly, GoFundMe only allows you to raise money. And one thing, I realized throughout my experience in life is that people have needs aside from just raising funds. I was born in Wisconsin. I grew up in Florida. I've lived in places where, people want to make an impact, but sometimes that means making a casserole and bringing it over to somebody's house, or mowing somebody's lawn, or, getting them a gift, right? Different people want to feel like they're helping out in different ways. But I wanted to marry the ability for people to help out and how they wanted in ways people actually needed help. So they weren't getting things they didn't need. And so the difference between us and GoFundMe is that GoFundMe, you can be on GoFundMe and create a page and get donations, but then you would also need to be on another platform. Like say, if you wanted to do meals for Meal Train, you have to be on another platform. If you want to do an Amazon gift registry, right? So you have to be on all these different platforms to get all the help that you need at a time where, time is at a premium. And so the goal of Supportful is to have everything all in one place at a time that you need it the most without having to do this research. And so GoFundMe limits you to just being able to fundraise. And I think, there's power in that, and that's great. But, I think, when people have needs, they extend far beyond that. And so we wanted to make sure that we were acknowledging those hardships and those needs and those struggles that people had, and be able to use technology to be able to bring that all together, consolidate that, and really make it easy and convenient for a time in your life where you don't have the time to do the research and do all these things.
And I've got to ask, what's the story behind Supportful? Can you share the inspiration behind the company and the path that got you here today? I mean, you've mentioned your father a few minutes ago. Was it that or something different?
Yeah. So, kind of early on, I grew up, I was born in Wisconsin, same hospital my dad was born in, my dad's dad was born in. And, grew up as a very close family. My dad, we moved around a lot. We lived in many different states. We would, move from state to state, kind of wherever work was. We were on food stamps. We lived in a trailer, one thing I learned from my dad is hard work, and hard work pays off. It's called hard work for a reason. It's hard and it's work. And there was times where you wouldn't see him until very late at night, or, he'd be gone the first thing we wake up in the morning. And, I always respected that about him. And, I went to school. I worked ever since, I was 15. I paid for college myself. I did a stint in banking, and then I worked at a charity. I started volunteering there, and especially during the '08 crisis, having, I think, stability for me was very important, but also the ability to give back and really kind of have a transformative experience to giving back to the community, especially here in New York, where there's so many different groups of people. And afterwards, I realized I wanted to do something a little more intellectually stimulating, but kind of being able to marry making an impact in society, but also something that, between technology and something innovative. And so I started, working at different startups and, kind of dipping my feet in those. And, really, I think as I've gotten older and had more experience, was really enjoying kind of that aspect of my life, and trying to kind of figure out where I wanted to kind of get grounded, right? And then my dad in 2006, I think it was in March, I was actually going to go visit him that weekend on Saturday. He was rushed to the emergency room. And, my dad, as I mentioned, is a hard worker, and we lived in Florida. So he'd work in the heat, work in attics, he's very blue collar. And so as he got older, clearly he's in a lot of pain and tired. And so apparently we found out a week later that he was losing blood. He had a rare form of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was stage 4. It had metastasized into his bones, and all this pain that he was dealing with, he had been dealing with. He had just been sucking it up. But also the rapid pace at which it was progressing was just stunning. So I immediately went to Florida. I mean, I went straight from the airport, Uber to the ER room, and just stayed there with him. And, during this time, between my dad's diagnosis to my dad passing away on Father's Day, 3 months later, we were in the hospital. We tried treatment. We tried chemo. My dad didn't, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. My dad was the sole provider, and they didn't have good insurance. And we went through a lot of medical bills, the potential for a bone marrow transplant, So, there was a lot of financial insecurity. There was a lot of medical terms and jargon that we had to quickly learn. My sister, who's in the military, in the National Guard, she was actually in Afghanistan, had just flown back and flew back early. And so she literally went, from Afghanistan to also the emergency room, so really trying to process as a family unit, everything that's going on, educating ourselves, organizational management, asking doctors questions, communicating with family members. It's very overwhelming. And, not only for us, but also all the downtime walking around the hospital that you now live in, and seeing all these other families that don't have anybody there for them. They don't have the Nicholas there to advocate for them or to do the research. And for me, I found that so heartbreaking, right? And so that's one of the things that really stuck with me while we're ourselves trying to navigate this time. And then after 2 sessions of chemo, which my dad barely made through, he decided, and we all, came to a consensus that he wanted to just live out the rest of the little bit of time he had left at home. And so we were on hospice. We had family come over and really trying to, one, make our house ADA compliant. We had to build a ramp. We had to ask friends to come over, go to Home Depot, coordinating visits. My dad only had so much energy. Helping my mom at the time also, who was just trying to manage everything, was very overwhelmed. Even little things like mowing the grass or cleaning up after people, those things go really a long way. it's also exhausting, so managing all of that, while also trying to be there with my dad, because no idea how long, he could be there one more day, 2 more days, 1 more week. And also, is he lucid then? Is he not? So being able to be there really taught me the precious commodity of time and resources. And I'm glad that I had the foundation in and of myself to have the wherewithal to be able to multitask and do so much and be there. And I'm, I don't look back with any regrets. I'm really happy I was able to provide, such a service for my family and extended family, as well, who we all coordinated and came out, from Wisconsin. And it's something hard to deal with, as many people have lost loved ones, and as Supportful has grown, I've seen so many tragic stories, that it's really hard to process things as they're happening. And so afterwards, I took time off. I realized, I needed to take time for myself to kind of digest what was happening. I needed time to grieve, needed time to process. And also too, I needed to also still help my mom kind of build her life back up and coordinate neighbors to help mow the lawn and just kind of basic things, while she got her footing. And, I think it was during this time where I started thinking about, all the frustrations I had when we were in the hospital, when we were home, thinking there had to be a better way, to do this. Some things you can do online, so many things you have to do in person. And so that's where I started thinking of the nascent of Supportful, right? The ability where you could raise funds, you can tell your story, but also if you have supplies, gifts that you need, like I know we needed to get like a baby monitor to put in my dad's room, so that way he could have privacy, but we could hear if something was going on. And a lot of just equipment we needed in our house, as I mentioned, as well as volunteer tasks. Hardships don't affect one person. They affect a whole family. It didn't just affect my dad. It affected my mom. It affected me. It affected my sister. And so being able to provide that support as it was changing and evolving over time, is different for everybody. Everybody has a different journey, and a different story. And so thinking about how can I use the amazing technology and software that we have, to be able to do so, as everybody's unique, everybody's story is unique, everybody's journeys have different durations, and everybody also feels comfortable in different ways. So really having a resource to provide and empower people to be able to ask for help at a time whenever they want to. If they want to create a support page at midnight because maybe they're a caregiver all day and that's the only free time that they have, and maybe they only want to ask for meals or coordinating visits, right? The ability for people to be able to do so in a way that's convenient for them, and also a way to articulate their needs so they're not getting stuff that they don't need. Also in a grander scheme, looking at the Newton massacre, I remember reading in the news, there's so many boxes of teddy bears that people would send, and, what are you going to do with a bunch of teddy bears? That's the exact opposite thing you need, right? And then now you have this waste where you're trying to figure out a respectful way to give these away, or, it creates a burden on people, or during Hurricane Katrina, when the stories of all the, the clothes and like the wedding dresses that were in these boxes, on the beach and getting mold on them. It's like, what are you going to do with a wedding dress, after a hurricane? And so people mean well. It just sometimes becomes a burden on other people. So how do we match efficiently people who want to help and the needs that people have in the most practical and effective way? And so that's really what Supportful aims to do, is be able to marry those two together. So that way, during this time in your life, you can get the most effective, practical help in a way that feels more comfortable to you, and also as a supporter in a way that also feels comfortable to you as well, in a way that you feel like you're making the impact that resonates with you.
It's an incredibly powerful story there. And credit to you and your family for not crumbling, but managing somehow to stay positive throughout and ultimately creating a solution to help others. But from there, can you tell me how you leverage technology to bring the Supportful concept to life and help others?
Sure. So I think one of the hardest things in the beginning, which, I was trying to figure out is one, with software, just having a platform where people can tell their stories and accept donations, right? There's payment processing, there's fintech things you need to think about. But then also if you look at adding a volunteer registry for there, looking at the different ways technology can facilitate, it's not a one size fits all. So if you need some sort of messaging communication system, say you need somebody to help mow your lawn, if a couple of people volunteer, maybe it's somebody that you've know not that well from high school and somebody maybe from your church, right? It doesn't really matter who the person is, as long as you're like, this is the time frame that we need it, and the lawnmowers in the shed. But if you are, say, like one of our users had a double mastectomy, she has 2 kids, and she needs somebody to actually come in the house and just help her cook. She can't lift her children up, right? You may actually want to have a different conversation with people who are raising their hand and volunteering to help if they're coming inside of your house, right? It's a little more intimate of a situation. So really be able to provide the tools to communicate to one another, I think is important. And same with gifts and supplies, having a different suite of tools. So that way it's not just kind of one glossed over thing and it's, for lack of better words, janky in some aspects just for the sake of having it, but really being able to have it tailored for those specific needs. In addition to the fact that, being able to allow people to kind of self-police, right? I think with GoFundMe, there's a lot of concern around fraudulent pages or questions and concerns people might have. And so we wanted to make sure the technology that we were creating allowed people to report pages, to ask support page creators questions. It's also to really be able to facilitate that dialogue and also allow people to report it to ourselves. So we have internal software where we monitor bad actors, comments, things like that. So we can take an active approach on our end, but also to allow other people to do so on their end. So that way there's more trust, there's more communication as well. And so I think being able to have software and the tools to be able to do that, I think is extremely important. And that was one of the tenets that we wanted to create when we also first started Supportful and we built it. We took about a year to build the software, to test it, to get feedback. And so it took us a while. I'm sure other companies, shorter or longer, depending on how big of teams and resources that they have. But the ability to leverage technology, I think, especially now more than ever, where online connection is so important, to be able to give people from different communities, such as long distance caregiving, to be able to help, has been really critical in making sure that that's something that we're able to facilitate. And that's something, especially during quarantine, that we've noticed now more than ever, and there's more people on social media and the ability to integrate with, Facebook and be able to share your page privately via email or text or, publicly via, Facebook or any other social media platforms really helps kind of spread the word, raise awareness, and really just giving people the tools and resources that they need to be inspired, to have ideas, to see what success can look like in different categories. So that way, the reticence that many of us experience when kind of starting and embarking upon this, it can be intimidating. And so being able to see what success can look like from other people, see how communities can come together, and give tips and examples of things that they can do along the way, encouragement, as well as also just a team of people you can actually call and talk to in person as well. So it's also, using technology, but also using humans at the same time, I think is important given the intimacy and the nature of the types of things that people go through as well. So being able to offer both, that way you're not just on a machine and there's not just machine learning, but also that there's humans in human learning as well. So we're able to leverage all of our experiences as well to set you up for the most success possible in the way that feels comfortable for the user.
And of course, fast forward to 2020, and we now find ourselves living in incredibly crazy times. So can you offer a breakdown of specific ways that anybody listening that we can use in our new age and culture of online connections during this pandemic to actually help others. Because I think you've created something magnificent here. And if we can get that message across to people listening, how they can use that platform too, to come together as a community, I think it's a beautiful thing. But can you just point people in the direction of how they can do that?
Sure. So, I mean, the great thing is we have software in our pockets every day that we carry around with us, these phantom limbs that we have. And so I think, staying connected is now part of our psychological existence. And so, I think one of the great things that I really appreciated during quarantine is, being able to look at social media and within a day see how Chef Jose Andrews has, galvanized to help communities throughout the country, or able to see different friends that are talking about local restaurants that have food kits, and so I think it's, pretty amazing to see very quickly how we can help others just in our community and what opportunities there are. Specifically on our platform, we have different categories. We have a COVID, as I mentioned, related page. We're highlighting pages as well. So that way people want to get involved, they want to read more, support these different efforts, they can as well. So whether it's, from a personal campaign, or for it's helping a local business or something in the community, people are able to see what those opportunities look like as well, and help people in a way, again, that feels, most comfortable to them. I also think too, that especially, you mentioned crazy times. I feel like, it's a bit of a loaded phrase, if you will. But I think, being able to use our current culture and technology to educate ourselves is really important. And I think, we mentioned before the call or pre-tape that there's a lot of content readily available to consume and digest. There are no gatekeepers. It's raw and unfiltered, which is powerful, but there's no moderators, right? So the ability to take things out of context is very easy. But I also believe our users are more savvy nowadays. People do their research. And so we now have the opportunity to educate ourselves, learn, and also listen. And I think this is a magical time in which each of us ourselves, we can create new social, health, and psychological habits. Our actions affect others, and it starts with us. So whether it's somebody creating a support page, for example, a page that was created of somebody, it's like a hydration page where they have water and Gatorade that they're passing out to protests in Atlanta, and some smaller efforts to larger efforts of just the current climate of Black Lives Matter, or for local businesses that are struggling to stay afloat during COVID. There are people who've created pages just to, bring pizza to the local hospital staff, in their nearby hospital. So there's so many different ways, to educate ourselves, but also take action in light of these current events and help others as well. And then I'd say just the last thing too is it's great. I think I love technology. I'm very biased, obviously. But I love that over time, people are getting more comfortable sharing and opening up online rather than only in person. We all know the percent of people, on social media is dramatically increased because of that human connection. But also if you think just 5-10 years ago, people under 40 or whatnot wouldn't be on Facebook, right? And now everybody is. They're on Facebook, they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok. They're sharing stories of themselves. We're on House Party and Zoom, allowing others visibility not only into where we live, but our living conditions, which have been otherwise seen very invasive, very intimate. We can't present, this one manicure curated version of ourselves in public, and then be a totally different person once we walk, through our front door. Now we have no choice, but people are getting more comfortable letting that vulnerability and discomfort go in order to stay connected, whether it's with work or, most obviously, but also to socialize or in general staying connected with others, which is just an innate human trait. And so I think the more comfortable we feel allowing others at non-vulnerable times, we'll feel more comfortable during times of crisis, during times of intense vulnerability, which means more people can get the help and support they need. I always say closed mouths don't get fed. If you don't ask for help, you don't give them a chance to say yes. And people have their reservations for many reasons, either because of stigma, pride, but people are moving past that. They're seeing that they are there's other people reaching out to get support from themselves, their families, their communities, and what success can look like. So it no longer feels as overwhelming if thousands of people are doing the same thing.
And for anyone listening that's downloading the Supportful app while they're actually listening to us or checking out the website, can you just walk me through how they can how the platform works and how they can get the most out of the platform? And possibly, do you have an example of a successful campaign as well you could share?
Sure, yeah. So setting up a support page is quite simple. I'll just go to supportful.com, SUPPORTFUL, supportful.com. And you can click on one of the many buttons that we have to create an account. You can enter in your basic personal information, your email, your fundraising goal, tell your story, add a compelling photo, make your page live, connect it to a payment service provider. We use PayPal, and then you can share your page however you'd like, privately or publicly. And one of the best things about the setup and getting your page live is you can edit any of this at any time. So you can change your fundraising goal, you can edit your story, you can change your photo. So you don't have to have all these things at the ready. You don't have to have the most compelling story, or if you left something out, you can provide updates. And also we have a team of people too that can help you along with that if you want somebody to proofread your story or you want to get some ideas or advice. So setting up a page is simple, and then adding to it is also very simple as well. We're here to coach users along the way so they don't have to spend so much time thinking about it. We acknowledge you're already going through a lot. Personal conflict, pressure from family, and I think just even telling a story, there's a lot of pressure. I remember trying to tell my dad's story. It's emotional. It's hard. How do you find the words at a time where everything's moving so quickly? As well as articulating just your needs, So we want to make sure that people don't feel like they have to have all the answers now. They just need to start. And so we have created software that allows our users to adjust and update their campaigns as their journeys, their challenges, their successes have changed. So if your needs in the hospital will most likely be different once you get home and have to take care of your children and go to rehab, going back to managing your home and your job. And to your question of successful campaigns, there's a couple I'd like to point out, just given the diversity of them, that kind of initially came to mind beforehand. One is there's this page for the Ogden family, and it's a woman who's a Navy helicopter pilot, and just 5 days after giving birth to her third child, a baby girl, she had a severe hemorrhage stroke. She spent 2 months in the hospital and has been in full-time rehab, working to recover function as much as possible. Now, this happened in October of 2019. And since then, they have far surpassed their fundraising goal. I want to say they've raised maybe over like $40,000 of the $15,000 goal to help pay and offset expenses. But they're also able to showcase on their page tasks to lend a hand. So in-home care, therapy sessions, and coordinate rides to rehab. And they're still using that 8 months later. So if you go to their page, like they still have, rides to and from chemo. So they're still utilizing something that happened in October for needs that they still have now, which I think is fantastic. And they're also able to give updates and keep their supporters informed of what's going on. We've also had a page, PPE for Black Midwives. The National Black Midwives Alliance is organizing needs in the wake of COVID-19, and they've even partnered with Everyday Birth Magazine to create PPE kits. Also in COVID, there is a page that's called Friends of Sleepy Hollow Caddy Support. And they've raised over $100,000 to support their caddies who've been out of work. And they created this page right when quarantine started, acknowledging the fact that, a lot of people are now losing out on work, and it's often the people who need the work the most. So that's pretty amazing to see everybody come together in such another different community. And then also there's a page, it's called Mary Grace Presley. And it's a family who lost a newborn, and their friend created a support page for them. It was actually recommended to them by another couple in the same city in Texas. And they've utilized the lend a hand section to include prayer times, coffee visits, help with cleaning. They have donations to help ease the financial burden they're going through. They have gifts and supplies section where they've set up the ability to not only make a donation to an organization from others called Men, but them and their other friend who did something similar, they created a memorial garden in their backyard. So they had, simple things like plants and shrubs, a plaque, so they could set up a beautiful and simple tribute to honor something so precious at such an intense time. So there are definitely pages of people going through hardships. But then there's also people who are going out of the way to help others, like the National Black Midwives Alliance or Caddies, or there was a story of a kid who raised money to buy a van and supplies to drive down to Mexico of a school he had visited that were severely underfunded and had very little resources. And I want to say it was on the Kelly Clarkson show on like their feel good segment. So people are going out of the way to do great things, and they're proactively helping out. And then there's a lot of people reactively kind of, managing things. So being able to see such a wide diversity of people getting help, giving help, for me is really powerful, because that's what we, created this platform for. So it's great to be able to see the diversity of campaigns we have.
And you used a great line a few moments ago that closed mouths don't get fed. And I think that line is so important, though, because there will be people listening that might be in need of help, but feel embarrassed or too proud to reach out. So do you have any tips on how to use the platform without feel like it's a form of digital begging? Oh,
yeah. This is something I feel very strongly about. I think we as a society have learned to champion the spouse that's run themselves into the ground, taking care of their loved one, like literally run themselves into the ground. Their health suffers. They put everything on hold. There's no bandwidth. They have no savings. And they're the in-home caregiver. And now they're probably sick themselves. Right. And they're psychologically exhausted. And it's only when that happens that they ask for help, right? Because it's too late. People are desperate. And I think this is, systemic, but we champion the martyrs, right? As if the amount of manual labor you put in equates to how much you care about the person. But rather than that, what about the smart person, either the spouse or the child, who says early on, this is not sustainable, right? We can't continue to live like this. Either with physical care, caregiving as a whole, or just financially paying the bills due to loss of income, or both. We don't value getting ahead of the curve and taking care of ourselves, our loved ones, and longevity, as well as involving our community. And that's something that really grates at me. And I understand, but I think there's a balance between both. I think asking for help early on is a prudent thing to do. But divorcing ourselves of guilt, shame, and pride is a difficult thing to tackle systematically. And so I think that exists. And so I think the acknowledgement of that system is important. When I worked at the Alzheimer's Association, we would go into different communities, and I remember there's one thing we had in Coney Island, and it was a walk to raise awareness, and there was a very strong old Russian community that lives in Coney Island. And there was one of our staff members. She was Russian, and so she was able to talk to some of the people who were would stop by, and we had free breakfast. So we could get coffee or cookies or whatever the case is, even if they weren't part of the walk, right? Just to raise awareness, we have pamphlets, and she was telling me that people didn't even want to go by the table because they thought they would get Alzheimer's. People thought that if they said the word Alzheimer's, they would get Alzheimer's, and how, I know different cultures, can have different superstitions or different ways of thinking about things. But I mean, it really kind of just blew my mind as to just the extremism of that, right? And so in addition to just the stigma of asking for help, a lot of minority communities have gone through so much, especially if you look at the older generation, they've gone through so many things. There's a lot of pride in asking for help. And so one, getting past that is important, but also two, just acknowledging the diversity of the user base and where they're coming from. I think, and as I said earlier, acknowledging that and being aware of that is important, because it's hard to help somebody if you don't know the audience that you're addressing. And as with regard to kind of thinking about it, as the form of digital begging, which I totally, I think is a great question, right? Is really driving home the fact that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. I can't stress that enough. I saw, when I was in the charity sector, too many families that waited too long to ask for help. I always say, imagine if you knew your neighbor, a colleague, a friend from church, if they had something going on, they had a child diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, they had to take leave from work, they were traveling to and from out-of-state hospital, right? And they didn't, perhaps know when they'd be able to go back to work. It's a no-brainer. You'd want to help, right? But you may not feel comfortable or have the capacity to give money. You may not find it fulfilling. You may have you may want to give them a gift or gas towards a car rental or in-person help, right? But if you don't tell them, you don't give them the option to be able to help you. And so whenever people talk about asking for help and feeling like, I don't want to beg, I don't want to seem like I'm, inconveniencing people who are already going through so much, especially now, right? We as a nation are going through a pandemic in addition to all the other things going on. Is I say, what if it was the other way around? What if that was your neighbor that was going through this and they never told you? How bad would you feel that one, they didn't feel comfortable asking you and letting you know, and also letting you help? And so, I think that often kind of changes the mindset as well. And I think if we think about it like that a little bit better, I think then that helps kind of shift the modality of how we ask for help and also how we are putting ourselves out there. I think people value giving back in a sense of impact differently, but people want help. I think it's inherently in our DNA to want to help others when we have the bandwidth to do so. It's the ways that which we do so become barriers to entry. Maybe difficulty giving money online for some, that just may be another donation in the void of donations that you may have forgotten by year's end. But if you can contribute towards an expense, such as a hotel stay at the Cleveland Clinic Children's Hospital or helping drive a neighbor to chemo, like that'll certainly stick and make an impact. So I encourage people, one, don't wait until it's too late. And also to always think, if it's the other way around, how you would feel if somebody you cared about didn't open up and let you know what was going on and give you the ability to help.
Well, I've loved chatting with you today and hearing about the amazing story behind Supportful. But before I let you go, you also wrote a very powerful and timely article about combating racism in the workforce. So before I let you go, could I ask that you just tell everyone listening about that article and what you covered in that, just for anyone that might have missed it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I had the privilege to write a piece that was actually published last week at Fast Company. And it's about how leaders can combat racism in the workplace. I'm gay. I'm part Japanese. I grew up, in a variety of different backgrounds. So for me, watching the sorrow, watching the outpouring over every state, over the nation, and now over the world, I think it's really important that business leaders grapple and actually take responsibility to address these conversations, no matter how uncomfortable they may be. I think the first step is really embracing your diversity and empathy as a leader. We all come back from different backgrounds. Even though I'm gay and I'm white and Japanese, I look white, right? So I acknowledge that I have reaped the direct results of white privilege, right? But it doesn't mean my life hasn't been hard. It's just not because of the color of my skin. But I think being able to appreciate the diversity of culture, ethnicity, religion, socioeconomics, disabilities, personality types, it's something that we should come to expect. And I think as leaders can embrace that, and surround themselves with other diversity, I think that is important. Just as the first step is kind of looking at yourself as a leader. And then I think as a company, addressing racial inequality isn't something that we can just ignore or sit quietly idle by. I'd like to take a step back and think, my opinion is not the only opinion that matters. Other people think differently, and it's by challenging that which really prompts questions and makes us all better as a whole. And so creating an environment where people feel comfortable speaking up, raising their hands, and being present, it's important because it will help us as a company become a better company, and we'll have increased profitability, be able to better serve our users better.
Well, I'm conscious we've covered a lot of ground today. So for anyone listening that would like to dive in and find out a little bit more information, can you remind everyone where they can find you guys online and also contact your team if they are left with any additional questions?
Sure. So I'm on, all the social media channels. Our handle is @Join Supportful on all the social media platforms, or mine is Nicholas Emerson Mazzoni. I think it's nick.emaz, nick.emazz. Or you can email me directly, Nicholas, NICHOLAS @supportful.com. Or you could just email help@supportful.com, and anybody from our team can get back to you, as well with any questions that you may have.
Well, I love how you've used technology to create something and help others. But at the heart of all that, I also love your diversity, and the experience that you've gained has actually equipped you with the skills to be an empathetic leader. And that, combined with the technology, has just created something wonderful. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. I really appreciate it.
I love how Supportful is using the technology to unite the global community in this digital age, and also this culture of online connections to help one another by donating to basic living expenses, shipping groceries, creating care packages, creating virtual tip bars or happy hours for local bars, coordinating wellness check-ins, scheduling digital entertainment for the elderly. It's not just about cash. It's about something even more valuable than cash. It's about donating your time. And given the fact that people everywhere right now are experiencing a range of hardships, from, yes, financial and job losses, but to hospitalization and isolation, and the challenges that come with that to the lonely and those suffering with their mental health. So I love what the guys are doing here at Supportful, but what are your thoughts on this? As always, this is where you tell me your thoughts, your experiences. Have you used Supportful? Are you using a different platform? How are you using technology to help others? And not necessarily by donating money, but your time. So please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. If you'd like to come on the show, if you want to apply for sponsorship, if you want to work with me, whatever it is, even if you just want to ask me a question, I'm the easiest guy in the world to find. So please keep those emails and messages coming in. You guys make me want to jump out of bed in the morning. So thank you for that. And I will join you here, same time, same place tomorrow. So thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.